Good evening. We are still watching the atmospheric river event that has been impacting the Pacific Northwest. Flood watches, flood warnings, flood advisories, hydrological outlooks, kind of all the green advisories you can put on the map we've seen over the last 5 to 6 days from this event. This visual right now, this is the visible satellite across the Northwest today. Pretty much, much of, if not all of the Pacific Northwest shrouded under clouds and rain today, much like it's been yesterday, the day before that, Monday, Sunday, through the weekend as well. So plenty of rain has fallen in the area, tons of snow up in the Cascades and the upper elevations, and more of that coming through today, as is evidenced by the clouds and rain coming on shore. Now, if you look kind of in the middle of the screen here, you can see all the clouds and the rainfall that are impacting the Willamette Valley now, parts of western Washington, really kind of getting all the way through the state over into eastern Washington as well. If you look to the south, finally getting some of this activity into California, which for the most part, as a state as a whole, has stayed somewhat dry from this event. They're finally getting some rainfall into the coastal regions, almost all the way down through kind of the San Francisco area. Some of that rain trying to push east into the North Valley as well. It's there on radar. We'll take a look at it in a bit. Not seeing a ton of actual rainfall observations getting to the ground in the North Valley. That can happen sometimes, but we are expecting rainfall at some point this evening as that system pushes on shore. If you look on the left side or to the west of the kind of current cloud field or cloud shield over the Pacific Northwest, you can see a few other kind of little low pressure systems spinning, some moisture associated with those. That's indicative that we're not quite done with this series of rainfall events yet. Now, not quite as powerful. If you look at them, they don't have that kind of robust Pacific moisture connection, but nonetheless, more rainfall in the forecast, at least kind of as we get through the weekend here to talk about. We'll get that in the video here. And then I want to share with you all some thoughts I had with potentially more of the rainfall longer term trying to push into California because we've been a little bit drier. And we'll touch on El Nino quickly right at the end of the video here. I did want to show this. This is from Monday, looking at a wider satellite loop across the Northeast Pacific. And it's just really impressive to see how big this system was. You have a huge low pressure system spinning in the Gulf of Alaska. That's up here in the middle of the screen. And then there's your atmospheric river, that Pacific moisture connection. We looked at this last week where really that Pacific moisture was coming all the way from Hawaii up into the Pacific Northwest. You can see that evidenced here by this cloud field and all the rainfall pushing into parts of the Pacific Northwest, Washington, Oregon, over into Idaho as well at times. Just a massive system, kind of puts it into perspective of how big these weather systems are and why they bring so many inclement effects, how they can get so much rainfall and snowfall into the Cascades. Take a look at current radar loops here. This is kind of what I was talking about. If I zoom in here on parts of California, you can see that getting some rainfall radar returns there, which make you think it's raining in that area, but we aren't quite seeing the observations push into the North Valley yet. Now, this video I'm recording in here just after lunchtime this evening, expecting some of this rainfall to finally get to ground here north of Sacramento. There is rainfall being reported along the coastline here where it's coming on shore. But if you look to the north of that, the Willamette Valley seeing rainfall observations in here as well. They have seen no shortage of those over the last 6 to 7 days, getting some pushing into eastern Washington as well, and parts of southwest and western Washington here just through the day here on Wednesday. If we look at the last 5 days of rainfall, the totals kind of through the weekend and then up into the first half of this week, these 5 days ending this morning here on Wednesday morning. Really looking at 3 to 4 inches accumulated in the Willamette Valley just over the last 5 days. Much more than that in the upper elevations, much of that falling as frozen as snowfall. Even higher amounts coming to ground in some of the low-lying areas of Washington, but even getting material amounts into eastern Washington, into parts of northern Ohio, Idaho, the Palouse, parts of eastern Oregon, even the Snake River Valley as well. Not as much as we saw certainly along the coastline of Oregon or in the Willamette Valley, but serious rainfall pushing into this area as well from the system as it moved kind of across the mountains there in the Cascades. And perhaps, just as big of a conversation we talked about the rainfall is all the snow that's been falling. I tried to zoom in here to give you some idea of how much snow we're talking about in parts of the Cascades here. If you look at some of these values, we're talking inches of snowfall here. So the Rainier area we're talking multiple feet, 2, 3, 4 inches of snowfall. And this is just over, I believe I accumulated this on the map here over the last 5 days. So even more than that if you extend it over the last 14. Multiple feet of snowfall accumulating up into the Cascades. Some of the ski resorts just announcing their opening over this weekend. There's been a little bit of melt since then, but healthy snowfall into the eastern Oregon elevations as well. If I blow this back up to where it was at the beginning, you can see mountain snowfall all the way through northern Idaho, Salmon River Mountains to the east of there, Yellowstone, across Utah, even western Colorado as well. I mentioned those areas because that's getting into our Colorado River basin we're going to be talking about at the beginning of next year to look at where those Colorado River levels are. If you look to the south or to the west, Sierra Nevada not seeing a lot of the snowfall here from this event. Now, they're expected to get some snowfall here overnight tonight, I think into Friday as well. We'll take a look at that in the forecast just a bit. Not anything too significant, but doesn't hurt right now considering that it's a little too early to be talking about a below average for the water year, but the Sierra Nevada is running a bit below average for the water year based on missing out on some of these recent events. So I'd mention the forecast here. This is valid as of this evening here, Wednesday evening. Here's what I was talking about. Some of that rainfall likely to push into the North Valley here finally, getting into this evening. In the upper elevations of the central and northern Sierra, expecting a little bit of snowfall accumulation as well. Potentially seeing tonight rain showers all the way through the Salinas Valley and the Monterey area, maybe just a bit to the south of that as well. As I play this through overnight tonight into Thursday morning, we have another one of these systems coming on shore in the Pacific Northwest. This one a little bit more focused on northern California, parts of southwest Oregon, but potentially rainfall all the way up through western Washington as well. That pushes through the elevation into the Snake River Valley, expecting light snowfall mixed with rain as we go through the night on Thursday night. Nothing too significant in terms of accumulations or total precipitation amounts. Potentially getting into Friday, another short series of drizzle or showers on the backside of that for western Oregon. And we get a little bit of a break going through kind of Friday PM and into Saturday through the weekend, with another system kind of coming through the Pacific Northwest finally on Sunday around lunchtime, potentially Sunday into the afternoon hours, with additional rainfall coming for the Willamette Valley, snowfall in the upper elevations, rain into western Washington, and this one just nicking kind of the northern edge of California here. That might be kind of the last rainfall system we see just for a little bit of a time, maybe the end of if we'll package it with the recent series of rainfall events than what we've just witnessed over the last week as well. We see something, if I play this forward, of a break in the rainfall and the snowfall as we go through the week. Now getting out to Wednesday, Thursday the 14th here, all the way into the 15th, 16th, and not really seeing anything of note or to write home about here going through the work week next week. Can't rule out something kind of pushing through on Thursday like you saw there, but certainly looking next week quite a bit drier across almost the entire region, certainly compared to where we were just a week ago looking at the forecast. If we get additional rainfall totals, this is kind of starting today, going all the way out to early Monday of next week, kind of encapsulating the two short systems that are going to come through tonight, and then the next one Thursday night into Friday, and then that Sunday afternoon one. Seeing an additional potentially 1.5 inches, all the way up to 2, maybe a little bit over 2.5 inches of rain here in the Willamette Valley, depending on where exactly we are. Potentially more rain coming through northern California, certainly more for the coastal areas, potentially more snowfall for the Sierra Nevadas, particularly the central and northern Sierra Nevadas, and just a little bit of rainfall here overnight tonight into parts of California and the Northern Valley, talking anywhere from maybe a tenth, quarter of an inch, can't rule out a 1/2 inch value here as some of the showers push through overnight tonight. If we look at snowfall from the kind of here out to that next early Monday period, we just looked at the rainfall for that period. Again, when we're talking about the Cascade snowfall at this point, we're talking about feet of snowfall, potentially another foot falling in the highest elevations. Can't rule out 2 feet as well. Heavy snowfall expected in the Idaho mountainous areas east of there into Yellowstone. Just another kind of healthy amount of snowfall getting into some of these river basins here as we go through December. And then you can see the central and northern Sierra Nevadas getting a little bit of a top off here as well, potentially seeing 8 to 10 to 12 inches here in the highest amounts or the highest elevations. Want to take a look. This is just Salem, Oregon. I mentioned kind of as we went through the summer that there was some concern because we were entering the fall period with drought. And we can see this here. This is the year-to-date precip for Salem, Oregon throughout the year. That curved line that you can see in the middle of the screen, this is our average accumulation of rainfall as we go out throughout the year in the Willamette Valley. We were dry through summer. We were hot at times. We had concern of that persisting through fall with drought. That's because when we looked at prior El Nino years, we saw that risk of drought there in parts of the Pacific Northwest, really the Northwest United States as a whole. So that concern was there, but it's wasn't really founded as we've gone through this year in 2023. Not every year, is made exactly the same. And we've really been above normal on precipitation since the beginning of fall, and that has worked us really back to normal in terms of the precipitation year-to-date totals, just looking at this graphic here in the Willamette Valley. And those individual rainfall events are on this graphic here as well. These are these kind of blue bars you can see here. You can see a number of big events here over the last kind of 2 to 3 months have brought us kind of back to normal. Based on, where we were just in summer talking about drought, those drought classifications kind of being removed every time the new drought monitor comes out, and how quickly the situation can change with all the rainfall pushing in. As you can imagine, if we look at soil moisture deficits and those anomalies, this was a map that had a lot of red on it not too few months ago. Now it would be hard-pressed to find any serious kind of soil moisture deficits compared to the daily average here for the Northwest. Even some saturated soils here across parts of the Pacific Northwest. Not much lingering soil moisture deficits at all in the Willamette Valley, the Snake River Valley as well, looking at wet soils here going through December. Now, one area I've kind of been mentioning it, and it's of interest to me when California is going to get back into some of this water and the rainfall in the forecast going forward. I mentioned last video that we might be waiting until mid-December or after to see some of the rainfall. I'll talk about that in just a second here, but I wanted to show you the past 30-day anomalies for rainfall, and it kind of sticks out like a sore thumb looking at California, parts of western Nevada, through the Central Valley and the Sierra Nevada is running lower now over the last 30 days, and what constitutes kind of the beginning of the water year here for this area. Not a huge concern yet. We're keeping an eye on it kind of as we go through the forecast here. I think we're still kind of on track for that after December 15th, looking out in that first week after the middle of December, when we might be looking at our next significant rainfall for California. One reason that we've been mentioning that, and this is kind of still the case, this narrative hasn't changed too much, is that the MJO, we're trying to watch for that to get back into the Pacific Ocean. Now that is the forecast right now. So here we are on the 6th, looking at the MJO forecast. We're expecting this to extend back out into the Pacific Ocean, starting the western Pacific, and then making its way across far western toward the central Pacific. Typically when it does this, particularly in wintertime, we get a more robust Pacific jet stream, even the subtropical jet stream, to help get some systems back into California. Now, if you look closely, it might be hard to see, on the screen here, the dates when this is actually expected to kind of get out into the Pacific. We're talking the 14th, 15th, 16th, even getting out into the 20th before it's in phase 8, more toward the central Pacific. So that's why that's the time frame we're keeping an eye on for that rainfall to return back toward the forecast in California, and maybe why it's missed out on some of it in recent times. Another way to kind of look at that was the ECMWF forecast for the MJO, but now looking at the European model forecast for the jet stream, try to get a hint of where that might be going, how that might impact the jet stream and get rainfall back into the forecast. If I take this forecast through this weekend, all the way out into early next week, and we just look at that jet stream forecast there across the Pacific Ocean here from the ECMWF, we actually see a big ridge coming up and over the western United States. That's part of the reason we're expecting the precipitation to shut off for the region going through the work week next week. This valid now December 13th on Wednesday. So that big ridge over the area, we don't get that kind of Pacific moisture connection we were talking about just a week ago. But we also don't really see this kind of big subtropical jet extension or split flow. What I mean by that is sometimes kind of near Hawaii or just north of it, we get this split where we get a big ridge over the Pacific Northwest, and we get this subtropical jet stream trying to push up into California. We can maybe see some of that nearing Mexico, but it's shunted too far to the south. So as I take this forward into the future, I'm watching for a more robust subtropical jet stream trying to push up into California. And when I get out kind of toward the December 16th, 17th, we're getting well out into the forecast now. Well, at least there's kind of something down here coming from Hawaii, perhaps trying to get up into Southern California. We might even have something of a split flow where you're trying to get some ridging over British Columbia in the Northeast Pacific. So not a huge signal for rainfall for California. I think it's better than what we're seeing just out into next week. And it does stay consistent a little bit with what we're watching for, and that we're expecting rainfall to creep back into the forecast for the state. Potentially Southern California first, getting out into that second week, or that third week, I should say, of December. If I take the ECMWF ensemble forecast all the way out to the end of the period, we're talking 10 to 15 days out, so I can't take any forecasts here too much verbatim. Certainly a lot of grains of salt added to this one, but we are seeing a little bit of a hint of higher than average precipitation trying to push in, again, in that kind of third week of December time frame. And that's where I'm kind of curious to see where the models go from here to see if that's a more robust signal or if it's kind of fooling us into kind of looking for something that might not be there. At the very least, the MJO, I think, supports that forecast, lends it a little bit more confidence that that's what we might be seeing. If I jump over and look at the Climate Prediction Center to get their opinion from NOAA, they're kind of right there as well. We saw that kind of slight above average precipitation signal from the ECMWF ensemble, kind of overlying very well with the Climate Prediction Center, their 8 to 14 day precipitation outlook. Those anomalies as well, seeing that as well, again, that third week of December here. So that's what I'm keeping my eye on for the forecast as we push toward Christmas here and what's been kind of a dry 30-day stretch for California. If I take a look at the ECMWF, again, the European model forecast going all the way 30 days out, January 7th, or I should say December 7th out to January 7th. The forecast came in here recently pretty dry. No other way to spin that here for California and the Pacific Northwest. I will say this model hasn't been performing as well as we've gone through winter here. There were times in fall it was doing, we thought, very well, kind of picking up on some of these patterns, but it's been known to have this kind of recency bias where what's ever in that kind of near-term forecast, next week being drier than average for California and really the West as a whole, it tends to extend that farther out into the forecast than maybe it should. We might be seeing that here where it's kind of seeing the dryness that we're expecting next week and pushing that more further out into the 30-day forecast. There are times, maybe it picks up on a more robust signal like that. So I don't want to dismiss it entirely. It's kind of on my radar just because we've been a little bit drier over the last 30 days for the state as well. But if I turn around and look at the very latest seasonal outlook for winter from the same ECMWF, their precipitation outlook, jump over and take a look at that for December, January, February. This is kind of their final winter forecast right on the eve of winter here as we get into December. That remains wet for much of the state of California, save for maybe some parts of the northern Sierra Nevadas. Also looking wetter here across the Pacific Northwest as well. So 30-day forecast looking a little bit drier. I think our next kind of chance for precipitation, again, California in particular, is in that December week 3 time period. That's where we're watching it. But it hasn't changed too much in our thinking in terms of that entire winter. We also know for parts of the water year, especially in California, especially in the Sierra Nevadas and the coastal areas as well, we get a lot of that water year precipitation just in January, February, March. December can be kind of hit or miss. Sometimes we go through much of December very dry, but we get all the snowfall at the in the last week or even the last few days, say for like the 2021 winter. So just because we miss on January or December, I should say, doesn't mean that the winter is a bust. And I'm not worried yet about kind of El Nino falling off in terms of it being a bountiful water year, just some things we're keeping an eye on. I did want to mention El Nino quickly here. So these are the current sea surface temperature anomalies. This is as of yesterday here. Looking across the Pacific, there is our El Nino, pretty obvious at this point. We have these warm waters right in the central tropical Pacific. That is El Nino. But as I looked at this more and more over the last 7 to 14 days, it's different than when we looked at it over summer, where a lot of those warm temperature anomalies in the Pacific were positioned more to the east, way out here kind of off the coast of Peru, where El Nino typically first gets noticed. That tends to extend out into the central Pacific as it has over the last 2 months, and it looks more like a proper El Nino. But in the same sense, it's looking, I might say, a little bit stale, and that maybe we're not going to see too much more development from El Nino. And if anything, going kind of out into the next few months, we might see it weakening. That's totally normal. That's kind of the typical evolution of El Nino, and that's what some of the forecasts now are saying, that we very well may have peaked in this El Nino, which feels crazy to say as we were kind of waiting for this El Nino to be named earlier in June, gone through the last few months where it's kind of slowly strengthened. We did not reach kind of the super El Nino status. It's still a strong, kind of moderate to strong El Nino, but maybe the forecasts over the summer were a little bit too aggressive in where it would peak out at. Nonetheless, definitely a bona fide El Nino, just looking at this graphic here, but we may have seen its peak here by December 7th. And if I just look over the last 7 days of sea surface temperature changes, so the waters were warming up or were they cooling down over the last 7 days, kind of look in the Eastern Pacific here, certainly cooler or negative anomalies here just in terms of that 7-day change. That's why I might be suggesting that we could have peaked here with El Nino. If we go ahead and look at the indices for El Nino itself, we can see peaked out in those indices kind of right at the end of November. Have come down a little bit here in that first week of December. Makes me wonder, is that our peak here for this 2023-2024 El Nino winter? Doesn't change terribly too much for the forecast going forward. The expectation is that it will weaken as we go throughout the new year. But nonetheless, the impacts kind of in January, February, still expecting that more typical El Nino pattern. Just might be waiting a little bit longer here as we go through early winter for California to see some of that. I think that's all I have here for you all this evening. Thank you for watching until I see you next Wednesday.